From deadly siblings, disturbing secret laboratories, drunk neighbors, and haunting stalkers, here are some of the darkest TikToks ever uploaded to the platform. In the peaceful town of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Claire Miller was known as a regular teenage girl. At 14 years old, she, like many others her age, was immersed in the world of social media, uploading just some regular teenage girl TikTok videos. But there was something going on in her life that was far more complex and distressing than her TikTok presence suggested. You see, Claire lived with her parents and her older sister Helen, who at this time was 19. And Helen wasn't your average teenager. She was burdened by cerebral palsy, a condition that affected her balance, movement, and muscle control. And yet despite her condition, Helen's life was filled with the unwavering affection of her family, and in particular Claire. Claire and her seemed to have the perfect relationship. In fact, Claire was the perfect daughter. Those who knew her best characterized the junior high school student as ambitious, disciplined, and bright. She held the title of class president, and her admirable qualities of respect and honesty earned her an award. Her demeanor at school reflected a persona of happiness that was always ready to lend a helping hand. And you could see this from her TikTok videos, where she embraced her regular, warm, friendly American family. On the outside, she had it all. A loving home in a peaceful neighborhood with everything that she could need. But as the months went by, her behavior would start to change, as reflected by some of her more recent TikToks, where she started to become more edgy, which is normal for most 14-year-olds in school. However, with Claire, something was different. See, in the time of these videos, Claire's mental state was starting to concern many of those around her. She would often retreat into the quiet comfort of her room, where she regularly uploaded content on her Spirits and Such Consulting TikTok handle. There she would post more and more concerning TikToks. One, for example, expressed the similarities between herself and Annie Wilkes from the Stephen King book Misery. But as many young teenage girls would post about their affiliations with these sorts of villain characters, it wasn't really something out of the ordinary, as her preceding posts would be featuring her dad and her sister Helen. So even though there were some concerning posts, it still seemed fairly innocuous. She would still do videos lip-syncing to pop music, dancing freely in her personal space, and she continued to film her father and her sister Helen. Yet as she started posting more and more of these TikToks, her life was unraveling behind the scenes. Because even though everything seemed perfect on the outside, her audience had no idea what was really happening behind the scenes. You see, her first break was brought on by the stress of school bullying that had started ruining her life, mixed in with gender dysphoria and the COVID-19 pandemic, and it was fair to say her mental state was not good at all. But then things started getting worse. Her mental state continued to collapse. She always wanted to be perfect, and with this, she started suffering from voices in her head that were degrading her, telling her she wasn't perfect, and to even kill herself. And that's when she started to become obsessed with homicide, sending thousands of text messages where she expressed desires to inflict harm. Little did they know a chilling tragedy awaited them that would shatter their peaceful existence. One cold winter's night, Claire would experience yet another mental break. But this time, her break was severe. Claire wanted to inflict harm. She felt trapped, alone, and empty inside. Her mental health was collapsing, and she was now beginning to experience full-on psychosis. She was a kid who seemingly had it all, but was now becoming completely obsessed with homicide during these breaks. But instead of continuing to inflict harm upon herself, she now wanted to inflict harm upon others. So as the night came around and her family went to sleep, Claire planned out a strategy with the voices in her head. The strategy wasn't complicated, but was extremely confusing and manic, which is what led Claire to sneak out of her room while her family was sleeping, as her parents would be completely unaware of what would happen next. As Claire snuck down the stairs and into the kitchen, she would pull out the family's biggest knife, ready to find the family's easiest target, silently opening up her disabled sister's door. Knowing full well that her sister wouldn't be able to fight back, she would quickly pull out the kitchen knife and plunge it into her sister's neck, stabbing her sister repeatedly and as silently as possible. So silent that her parents wouldn't even wake up when Claire would take the life of their daughter. Immediately after the event, Claire was sat in horror, looking at her dead sister with a knife plunged into her neck. It was in this moment that she realized her life would never be the same again, leading her to manically text her friends saying, quote, "I'm so sorry guys, I just killed my sister." But as the adrenaline passed through her body, she would soon realize it wasn't just her poor sister's life that was over. In a matter of hours, her family and neighbors would soon know the horror that had just occurred at their house. By this point, it was already 1 AM, and suddenly the local police would receive a phone call, and the voice on the other end was none other than Claire's, fraught with distress, as Claire admitted to murdering her sister, telling the police that she, quote, Mike Myers her disabled sister. Following her directions, the police then arrived at the family home to a surreal and ghastly scene, where they saw Claire trying to wash the blood of her hands in the snow outside the home, and inside the home, Helen lay there lifeless in her bedroom, a large knife still inside of her neck. Immediately, Claire was taken into custody, where she showed disturbing calmness amid the tumultuous circumstances. Detective John Martin would later tell the court that after Claire was brought a fast food breakfast from the police, she replied, "Ooh, McDonald's. I'd have killed someone sooner if I knew I'd get McDonald's." And her unempathetic response to all of this makes this TikTok of her and her family together having fun just so much more haunting.
Mama, party girl, she just want to have fun too, they say.
In the social media age, it can seem like everyone wants to be famous, and sometimes we should really be careful what we wish for. Mass appeal brings with it mass attention, and as an audience grows, so do the risks. A perfect example is Ava Maturity, the now 16-year-old influencer who learned this fact under terrifying circumstances. Ava joined TikTok in April of 2020. Her content was primarily lip sync and dance videos, just like every other teenager, though she always played the occasional prank on a family member. And these videos were fairly innocuous, but because of Ava's personality and her affiliation with other teenage girls, her rise to fame was meteoric, because 2 years later, she would have a following in excess of 1.2 million followers on TikTok alone. A factor in her rapid success was her approachability. She'd often reply to viewers' comments, and this connection with her fans is part of what made her so likable. Little did she know, these innocent interactions with her audience would bring about something very strange. You see, during Ava's earliest days on TikTok, a user named EricJustin111 would discover her videos, and he immediately began seeking the influencer's attention, and because she made a point to interact, occasionally he'd get a taste of it. Justin would then progress to sending direct messages through Snapchat and Instagram, and even joining online games with Ava and her brothers. Things became especially troubling when he started calling her on her personal cell phone. This shocked Ava. Being just 14 years old at the time, this was terrifying. Some guy online was trying to stalk her, and now had her personal cell phone. This TikTok game was going way too far, and Ava would soon be told by a friend of hers that Justin had tracked down her friends, both in her current location in Florida and in New Jersey, where she had lived previously. And not only was she terrified that her location had been tracked by this guy who was following her TikTok videos, but he had found her friends, and soon he would find her family. And most shocking of all was that some of these friends really weren't Ava's friends, as a few of them had actually been willing to sell him pictures of her, as well as Ava's personal information. Soon Ava would be in a panic attack. Her friends were completely fake, telling all of her personal secrets to a guy stalking her. And this guy stalking her not only knew her location, but knew everything about her. Pictures of her, personal information, her phone number, her location, and she on the other hand had no idea who this guy was. On one occasion, Justin had, quote, logged onto a classmate's school account and did math homework in exchange for information about Ava and her family. And so soon, Ava's whole world would come tumbling down. The success of her TikTok videos was now destroying her life from within. It got to a point where Ava claimed, quote, I had to unfollow all of my local friends and Jersey friends, and everyone around me was like, oh, you're going Hollywood on all of us, you don't want to talk to us anymore. And I'm like, you're selling my stuff. Soon she realized that she could trust no one, and as she started to disconnect from everyone around her, Justin's obsession was growing. But then even stranger was that Ava's parents would make a very questionable decision, allowing their daughter to sell pictures to her stalker. Now I have no idea why the parents would ever do this, and it makes me think that Ava couldn't even trust her family, friends, or anyone in her life. She was completely isolated at just 14 years old. Everyone was using her for something. Ava, then likely trying to downplay the situation, said the following in an interview with a journalist. I wasn't sending anything of my body, it was just pictures of my face, which is what I assumed that he was paying for. My whole thing is my pretty smile, that's my content. In the same article, it's then stated that the stalker sent Ava $300 via Venmo, all in exchange for just 2 pictures. However, Ava went on to contradict this in an Instagram post during the aftermath, claiming she'd only sent 2 or 3 images that were posted elsewhere and had charged $5 for each. Regardless, it was soon becoming apparent that this would be a terrible decision. Now, at the very start of his obsession, Ava was only 13, but when he was targeting her, she was now a 14-year-old girl, and he wanted to see, quote, booty pics. This was crossing a very dark line, so after way too long, Ava would eventually block this obsessive fan on all social platforms, and her father would step in, seeing that the situation was unraveling in a very dark way, with her dad warning her against any further contact with this man. So in desperation, Justin resorted to throwing more money her way, with pleas to unblock him attached. The first payment was almost $160, and the second was another $100. The final payment of $370 came with a message that read, "Sorry, this is all I have left. I'm broke." With the cash having failed, Justin's impulses took him to darker places. Through kids at school, word reached Ava that her stalker was plotting something. The source was a classmate who was on speaking terms with the increasingly predatory follower. When confronted, this classmate forwarded Justin's messages, but they proved the rumors true. In one, Justin has said, "I want to grape emoji her bro." Now to be clear, this emoji is used by some online as a stand-in for the R word. In another, he'd said, "I could just breach the door with a shotgun, I think." Now Ava was terrified. This man was insane. And the fact that this man knew all of her friends and even family meant that she had no place to hide. So Ava would finally inform her parents of all of this. But their response again was so questionable. Her parents researched Justin, and when they realized he lived hundreds of miles away, determined that he wasn't a threat at all. Little did they know how wrong they would be. In the early hours of July 10th, 2021, Justin arrived at their residence, armed with a shotgun, accessed through a local contact, and at 4:30 a.m., he used it to breach the front door as planned. As Ava reclaimed, quote, "All I remember was I heard it, felt it in my chest, and I looked up, and there was a hole in my door from the fragments." With Justin shooting down their door, her parents rushed out of bed, her mum dialing in a panic 911, and her dad went straight towards the shooter. When her dad ran outside, Justin fled. The retired lieutenant gave chase but fell and wounded his knee. He then headed home, retrieved his pistol, and stood guard while waiting for the cops to arrive. But before they could, the predator returned. The dad demanded that Justin drop the weapon, but he would raise it instead. So with the adrenaline pumping through his veins, Ava's dad would shoot him cold. Police then recovered 2 phones from his body containing thousands of pictures of Ava. In this case, tragedy was averted. Everyone but the perpetrator survived. However, the experience still left its dark mark. Because after the event, the family were forced to move. Their neighbors felt that Ava's social media presence put them all at risk. Ava then switched to homeschooling. She no longer felt safe with anyone around her and couldn't trust anyone. Along with her parents' very questionable decision making, Ava would live a life of constant anxiety, never trusting anyone, always being in perpetual fear. And yet even with all of this, Ava's online career as a TikToker continues. But whether this is wise is very debatable, given she's still a minor with an overwhelmingly male audience. Nevertheless, the family are adamant that, quote, sick people won't push them offline.
然后的回忆，一张面具，开心一整天。
This video was uploaded to the Chinese version of TikTok Douyin by an account called Beanbag Adventures, a rising TikTok creator who would document himself urban exploring around China, finding abandoned buildings, mysterious items, and exploring the unknown parts of the country. However, as he continued posting on TikTok, he would find more success with a different type of video. You see, he quickly noticed that by exploring dark and creepy locations, his TikTok views would explode. That's why in the video you just watched, you could tell he had become used to exploring these creepy locations, as his reactions were fairly calm considering how strange this abandoned place was. And yet weirdly, after just a few uploads documenting this abandoned place, his account would go silent, with his entire account and all the videos on it eventually being wiped from the entire platform. Now, this does happen all the time on TikTok, whether it be because the creator wants a new life, their videos aren't gaining enough attention, or their account was just blocked by the site. But in Beanbag Adventures' case, the reasons for his account and videos removal were so much darker. It was February 2022, and Beanbag Adventures, who we'll call B from here on, arrived at a seemingly abandoned structure. Locally, it's said to be known as the Laboratory, though the truth of this is uncertain as the location has never actually been disclosed. Upon entering the building, B was overwhelmed by a strong odour, in spite of the respirator he was wearing. So he followed the stench, and it led him down to the basement and into a particular room, and it was there that he would make a disturbing discovery. A pool of stagnant liquid containing the decaying remains of children. And not just children, we're talking about newborn babies. Now initially when this video was first released, there was a fierce debate about the validity of the footage, as during the video itself, B said what he'd found there were movie props. It was likely an attempt to avoid having the graphic footage pulled, but whether his motive was to expose an injustice or to rack up views, we can't really say for certain. But having seen the content, it's pretty convincing, and would have been very costly and time intensive to fake. another indication of authenticity is that in the higher quality footage, maggots and insects are clearly visible on and around the bodies. After this insane post, B would then return to business as usual, and the conversation slowly died down on Douyin. On the 26th of December 2022, however, he went back to the lab, ready to gain more views and spark up more controversy, and what he captured there silenced most of the doubters. Because this time, things had changed. A few articles of children's clothing were strewn around, a pile of glass bottles had appeared, and within the pool itself were more corpses. And worth noting is that many bodies that are recognizably the same were now further decomposed. This was either an incredibly elaborate hoax, or it was real. Either way, someone had been in the lab since the first post. Now many were quick to discover that the bottles in the video appeared to be formaldehyde, a chemical used for the preservation of bodies. This could be why B appeared less bothered by the smell, as the substance would have lessened the stench, possibly because they knew someone would return. And the preservative being watered down is a reasonable explanation for why the dead aren't as bloated as bodies in the water usually are, and why they'd continue to decay, though not as much as they might have in other circumstances. After the second video blew up online, viewers had their own theories regarding the story behind it. Many believe that there was a ludicrously active serial killer, or group of killers, going around remote locations of China to dump their victims off. Others were still convinced it was an elaborate trick, but the theory that was really gaining traction at the time was a phenomenon already in public consciousness: organ harvesting. There was the suggestion that it was a black market effort, but the majority felt their government was behind it, and this idea wasn't without substance. It's well known now that China has a very low rate of organ donation, and yet seemingly has one of the largest transplant programs in the world. It's legal to harvest organs from prisoners in China, and they do this on an industrial scale. However, the prison population doesn't include children, and yet both transplant tourists and wealthy natives will inevitably have children who need healthy organs. So China's medical industry always manages to find them somewhere, even though no one in China is donating them, especially not children's organs. And yet in the video, numerous children in the water have open chest cavities, and their organs are missing. It's harrowing to consider, but children being kidnapped for their organs is actually a reasonable possibility here. Exposing this apparent injustice then led his audience to believe that B was a brave whistleblower against the Chinese government. But there were a few details in later videos that would call this into question. As Beanbag eventually saw this massive growth in traffic and views, he would return to the building yet again and dig even deeper. This time he claimed to have found a fetus in a jar. Now it is briefly shown in the TikTok, but the view was never really given a clear look, and there were no further details on this. He also found bags containing human bones, this time from adults. A dubious finding was the supposed human jaw found in a bag of remains. It had metalwork behind the back teeth with a significant protrusion on the outside of the jaw, perhaps as the result of a dental procedure or repaired break, but it's not dissimilar to the mechanisms found in anatomical models. The circular part of it looks somewhat like the fitting for a tooth implant, but it seems to sit too far back for this purpose. But in his fourth video, purported to be filmed on the upper floor of the building, B finds kids' clothes, bones, and masks. And with all these added layers of context, this TikTok video becomes incredibly dark, as this was the video that would confirm that this laboratory was not fake. Soon people across China would realize that these were real human bodies inside of this abandoned laboratory. But one of the weirdest things about all of this is that B seems to have been less emotionally affected by this discovery than the audience who was watching and finding it. With that in mind, it is possible that the grisly scene was legitimate, but when there was nothing to show, he took it upon himself to keep people watching. But as a result of him exposing these bodies within this underground laboratory, B's Douyin profile suddenly disappeared on the 15th of January 2023, and in the eyes of viewers, this gave credence to his claims. Admittedly, there was a widespread assumption that he was imprisoned or dead by the Chinese government, as this is a common practice for the Chinese government to do, silencing all criticism of their organ harvesting trade. And the fact that the Chinese government works with Douyin meant that this was very plausible, considering the huge backlash this was causing online against the Chinese government. But then, to his followers' surprise, the account was back a few days later, albeit with the lab videos removed. Since then, B has continued urban exploring, but has never addressed the gruesome happening. Did the authorities step in because the horrors were true? Was the government really trying to stem the flow of bad PR? Or was it something entirely else? The truth is, we'll never really know.
Всем привет, у меня сейчас жесть история. У нас там сосед, он пьяный, он, короче, стучится на дверь, всю ломает нафиг. Он уже несколько минут здесь стоит, стучится, орёт, матерится. Я просто мне страшно, блин. Он вообще... Мне страшно.
It's fair to say that nowhere should feel safer than our own homes. But in reality, sometimes danger can be closer than we'd like to believe. This is Felicia Konochuk, a 9-year-old girl from Chita, Russia. She lived in the city with her parents and 2 brothers, aged 4 and 14, with Felicia being described as pure, compassionate, and generous. And yet, at a very surprisingly young age, she would suddenly begin posting videos to TikTok. And if you saw only this video posted by her on TikTok, you would never think twice about it, because the video was rather ordinary with the quality to be expected from a child of her age. It seemed to just be a silly random video that any child would make. However, after a few uploads, the account suddenly fell silent, which is to be expected with a 9-year-old girl on TikTok. She's at school, has a life, and she's only 9 years old. There's probably not much thought behind this video. However, her actual silence on the platform wasn't for any of these reasons, because Felicia was currently part of one of the most tragic stories I've ever seen on TikTok. It was February 17th, 2021. At the time, Felicia and her siblings were all in their apartments while their dad, Fidel, was out shopping. Given the events that would unfold, Fidel has faced some criticism for leaving his kids home alone. However, this doesn't seem to have been the case. In truth, at the home, there were also repair workers present, and it was their ongoing repairs that sparked the ire of the man next door. This neighbor was the 33-year-old DIY store employee, Vasily Donets. According to Felicia's mother, Alina, the family previously had a good relationship with Donets, which only serves to make his actions all the more shocking. Fueled by alcohol and frustrated with the noise caused by the ongoing work in their house, he was going to confront his neighbors. He wanted peace and quiet and was sick of all the renovation work. So he turned up at the Konochuk's door, and with no parents around to handle the situation, the children wisely chose not to answer the door. Now, there's not many mentions of the renovation workers, but it's not hard to believe they'd have wanted to avoid getting involved in the affair of their clients. So there's a good chance they simply ignored the man at the door. Having gotten no response initially, Donets then became increasingly angry, and he was intent on making his feelings known. He wasn't going to let his neighbors pollute his house with noise, and didn't really care that the only people worth telling weren't at home. So as the minutes went by, his aggression kept on building up, fueled by the alcohol, until he reached the point that he was slamming the Konochuk's door. And this is where Felicia's TikTok videos began. Throughout her posts, she was giving a nervous smile and danced for a moment, but these attempts to appear calm didn't hide how she truly felt. It's clear from the footage that her neighbor's ferocity was growing, as was her fear. Felicia seemed convinced that things were going to go wrong, and in this TikTok video that you see right now, this would record one of the last moments of her life, because after she stopped recording this video, she went on to talk to friends and told them that finally her angry neighbor seemed to have left. Donets was slamming the door for more than an hour before things quietened down, and what happened next was truly shocking. But there were 2 conflicting reports. In one version of events, Felicia approached the door to film her neighbor outside, and her dad was yet to return home. In the other, her dad had already returned, and Felicia heard a soft knock at the door, which she answered, believing it to be a friend she planned to go on a walk with. Now, the first one does seem unlikely given how afraid Felicia was. It doesn't make any sense that she'd open the door for the sake of filming her drunk neighbor that she felt threatened by. And the second account comes directly from her dad, and also seems far more logical. She'd naturally be less afraid once her father was home, and she was expecting somebody. And regardless of which is true, the result is all the same. Still being drunk, Donets took his hunting rifle and fired multiple rounds through the Konochuk's front door. He was furious, and his rage was uncontrollable. But one of these rounds would hit Felicia directly in the head, severely wounding her. After the shooting, there was a small divergence in the story again, with several outlets reporting that her dad arrived at the apartment just after the attack, but the dad himself recounts the following, quote, "I ran into the corridor and saw my daughter covered in blood. She croaked, 'Dad, I've been killed.' I took her in my arms and shouted to my son and the repair workers to call an ambulance, and my daughter died in my arms. When the ambulance arrived, I carried her to them, but the doctors said that she had no chance to survive." When the police eventually arrived, her killer was sitting on the stairs nearby. Donets immediately confessed to the crime and was promptly arrested. Felicia's father went on to post videos taken in his apartment, and the pain of his loss is clear as day. During the trial, Donets claimed that Felicia's dad had kicked him, presumably upon his return, given how the situation escalated. The dad denied this, saying that he told the drunken neighbor to sleep because he would not speak to a drunken man. Now, whether this kick happened or not, this doesn't negate any fact that there was a huge loss of life, just for reconstruction work. Eventually, the killer was sentenced to 17 years in a penal colony in Siberia, but her father demanded harsher sentencing, with his justification being, "I just want the man to realize what he really did."